This is Into the Story, the podcast where you learn English with true stories from all over the world. Stories that connect us and inspire you to get where you want to go. Hi everyone, it's your host Bree. I have a question for you. Are you an imaginative person? Do you use your imagination? Are you creative? What about innovative? If you're like most people, you have an idea about imagination, creativity, and innovation, but you might not know exactly what they mean or how they're different. Scott Brandon wrote the book Imagination First, which talks about how imagination is our ability to think of things that don't exist. When we use our imagination to do something, well, that's creativity. And when a creative idea makes things better, that's innovation. But it all begins with imagination. And when we make it a habit, it can change not only our work, but also our lives. Today, we're going into the story of Scott Brandon. He's going to take us back to a time when he and his friends became determined to explore the mysterious, untouched places on our planet. Caves.
What do these places look like? How can we have such sheer beauty that's almost unexplored, that is actually available, but you have to learn how to get to it.
When he goes exploring deep down in a cave and finds himself hanging on a rope in total darkness, he realizes he's in trouble and he has to use his imagination to find a solution. Please make sure to click the follow button on your podcast app so that you never miss a new episode of the show. And as always, it's free. Now it's time to look at 5 words and expressions that Scott uses in today's story. The first is a very important concept and a word that you're going to be hearing a lot. Caving, also known as spelunking. So this is exploring caves as a hobby or an adventure activity. And the people who do this are called cavers or spelunkers. For example, the spelunker went deep into the cave and found fascinating rock formations. Or caving is an exciting activity for people who love to discover the hidden wonders of the world. Caving or spelunking. Next, to get drenched. D-R-E-N-C-H-E-D. To get drenched means to become completely wet. For example, I got drenched yesterday in the sudden thunderstorm, or the kids got their pants drenched when they were playing in the waves at the beach. To get drenched. Next, we have the 2 words slack versus taut. So slack refers to a loose or relaxed rope, while taut, spelled T-A-U-T, describes a tight or stretched rope. For example, before rappelling, climbers make sure that the rope is taut with no slack in it. Or he adjusted the slack in the rope to make it easier to climb. Slack versus taut. Next is the expression to not say something lightly. So if I say, I don't say this lightly, it means that I am emphasizing that what I'm saying is very serious and sincere. For example, I don't say this lightly, but I believe we need to make some changes to improve the situation. Or she didn't say it lightly when she apologized for her mistake. To not say something lightly. And lastly, tangled. To be tangled or untangled. So to be tangled means to be twisted and tied together in a messy or confused way, while untangled means to separate or straighten out. For example, the wires were tangled, making it difficult to connect the devices. Or I had to patiently untangle the knots in my necklace before putting it on. To be tangled or untangled. Today's episode has lots of great vocabulary, so I recommend that you go over to intothestorypodcast.com to get the full vocabulary list. You will also find the transcript and a listening comprehension quiz. Okay, it's that time. Let's get into the story.
So I was working as a landscaper, and one day a colleague brought a magazine to work and opened it up, and it was the best caves in the country, in fact, around the world, to explore. And we're all looking at it. There are four of us that were looking at this expose, this coverage of these caves, and we immediately had this moment filled with immense curiosity, immense enthusiasm. We're going to go do that. We're going to overnight magically become four kids who had never been on, the side of a mountain or climbed into a cave to avid cavers. But it wasn't about proving myself, though of course that was probably part of it. It was very much about, what do these places look like? How can we have such sheer beauty that's almost unexplored, that is actually available, but you have to learn how to get to it.
This is called technical caving. They'll be going into tunnels that are so small, there is just enough room for a human to crawl through. They'll also need to rappel over cliffs. So Scott and his friends get all of the equipment and they start to learn how to climb.
We started to do rock face climbing in southern Ohio. We then decided, well, maybe the next way to do this is to try to go up and down buildings. So we started to go over 3- and 4-story buildings just to explore what it's like to go rappel down and ascend up. And we read all about stalactites and stalagmites and all the things you might see in a cave. What are the conditions like in a cave? Because, it is total darkness. They're fairly chilly, clearly muddy, and there are bats and other creatures, sometimes thousands of bats, that you'll walk into a room and see. So we had to prepare the best we could for all of the things that we thought we were going to experience. And then we went and did a cave.
Scott and his friends have decided that it's time to go into a real cave. They go to West Virginia, a state in the eastern U.S., known for its forests and natural beauty. They went into a cave in the Monongahela National Forest, and Scott loved it. They went back to this cave a couple of times, and then one day he's talking to his neighbor.
So my neighbor at the time, who I thought I had a good relationship with, I thought we were, buddies, asked me if I would take him caving. He had never been before. He had done a lot of rock climbing. It was very much an outdoorsman, much, much more than I was. And I said I would.
Scott is going to take his neighbor, Steve, to that first cave that he ever did in Monongahela National Forest.
And so we drive from where we were. It was about a 2.5-hour drive. And we get to this forest. And it's just a big open field with some rocks jutting out of the ground in various places. And you almost wouldn't see the cave unless you knew it was there. but I knew it was there, obviously. And the caves that were worth going into were not the what you would call the commercial caves, the ones that you're guided through, because that's not what we were trying to do. We were trying to do technical exploration. And so he and I were looking for the entrance. I showed it to him. We geared up.
Scott and Steve put on all of their gear. They have special belts with clips and devices for going up and down the ropes. They had to use a rope to go down 55 meters into the cave. But Scott's usual long 60-meter rope was no longer in use, so he had to tie two 30-meter ropes together with a strong knot in the middle to make it long enough.
So to get back to the part of the cave that is the non-commercial side or the non-public side, he and I started walking through the mouth of the cave, through a lot of the rocks that were there. And there's big, massive boulders, and then there's places where there's small tunnels. And you can tell in a cave the public, non-public side of it, because you see some trash, you see debris, you see batteries, you see all those things on the public side. So you're keenly aware that that's going into a cave, but it's not caving, it's not spelunking. Spelunking's the exploration that goes a deeper level than that. And I was looking kind of almost as a self-exploration. Where does this take me? What's this offer me? What does this teach me that I can't see right in front of me? So the cave almost became almost a life metaphor for exploration and change and challenge. And so I'm leading him around this kind of public area, and you start to hear the sound of water, a waterfall, and the sound of like rushing water underground. It's a little disorienting. Once again, keep in mind, you don't see but for a few feet in front of you.
They have arrived at the waterfall. Now they're going to have to rappel 55 meters down into the dark hole below.
So I started to then say to Steve, I'll go first. I've done this before. I'll go first. You stay on top. And he argued with me. He wanted to go first. And I remember in the moment thinking, but you've never done this. I can't let you do that, because you got to climb over a 200-foot cliff, and rappelling down in free fall almost. And it's with a waterfall right next to you that's spraying you with water as you go down this rope. So you're getting drenched from the mist of the water, and you can pretty much not see very far. So, it's an experience that you wouldn't want someone who has never done it before to lead the way.
Scott begins to lower himself down into the dark hole.
The first step over from standing on the ground to walking over a cliff, to going from horizontal to vertical, and trusting this rope is tied in and is going to protect you, is in itself one of the most stimulating and terrifying moments you could ever have.
Scott has that feeling of vertigo all through his body as he lowers himself down into the dark hole. He's using only a carbide light to see, which is a lamp that uses a gas to make light. As he goes down, he reaches the knot where the two ropes are tied together. Scott practiced this before. He knew that he would reach the knot, unclip his carabiners, and then reattach them under the knot.
Now, we had tried this under 4-story buildings. The problem is that we had never tried it at this depth. So what I didn't calculate was that I was going to hit that knot, and my weight was going to pull the rope so far because the rope has some give in it.
Scott rappelled down to the knot as he had done before. However, this time he has become stuck because of the tension on the rope. He can't go up or down. And the more he tries to solve this problem, the more stuck and in trouble he's getting.
Added to it, this kind of rope slowly twirls. So you're starting to try to do all this as you're moving around on this rope. And the added benefit on top of that was the water, the mist of the water from the waterfall shut my light down. So I'm hanging over a cliff 100 feet or more, twirling, wet, and can't see, total darkness. Can hear, but I was also so far away from my friend that he couldn't hear me and I couldn't hear him, especially with the water roaring. So he didn't really know what I was doing, and I couldn't signal to him what was going on. The only bit of information he had was there was no slack in the rope. And the reason that's important is once the body gets off it, the weight's off it, there's slack in the rope. But if not, the rope's taut, the rope's, stretched. So I thought, all right, I just have to go back to what created this. Why was I stuck? And I knew that thought I knew I had all the equipment and skill set to be able to get beyond it. But Bree, what kept happening was there was a part of me that kept also going, why are you here? Why did you allow this to happen? 3 hours later, I'm still twirling on that rope.
Scott's hands are aching because he's been holding on tightly and trying to prevent his muscles from cramping. He understands that he's in big trouble.
So I came to the conclusion, and I don't say this lightly, that I was not going to make it, that this was going to not end well.
Scott realizes that he's going to have to cut part of his equipment, the webbing, which is what secures his body to his gear. And by doing this, he might make himself fall. He also knew that he was getting very cold. He might even get hypothermia, in which case he'd go unconscious and fall. So he knew he had to act fast.
I made peace that I might fall, that this probably was not going to end well. But it was my only option. I really had no other choice at that moment. So I had this moment, and I can still feel it viscerally, where I cut the webbing. And what I expected was I was going to fall backwards. And then the bottom carabiners and ascenders would lose their grip because they're not meant to work that way. The tension would come off them, and I would literally just fall down the rope. That was what I had assumed would happen. Instead, what happened, somehow the webbing circled around my neck, and I'm starting to get hung. And I only had one recourse. There was only one thing I could do, which was grab the rope above me, try to muscle, pull my way up, hold on to that while I was using my other hand to get beyond this knot. It worked. Clearly, I'm here. I got over the knot, went down the other 80 feet. I got to the bottom. I was trembling and crying and distraught for probably about 10 minutes. And there's only one more problem to deal with. I have to go back up. So I spent, I don't know, maybe an hour or hour and a half, down there just tying everything back up, getting some energy. So I did climb back up. I was able to figure out a way to do it where it was some minor adjustments. Took me what seemed like forever and a day to get up because I was still exhausted. I get up to the top, and my friend Steve looked at me and said his first words were, "That wouldn't have happened if I had gone first." And in that moment, because it was like, like living two lifetimes in somebody else's second, that when I heard him say it, I felt so depleted and defeated and angry. And we packed up. We didn't say a word for the rest of the trip.
This story took place in 1975, and after that, Scott continued to explore caves, but he never returned to the cave in this story.
Life is filled with mistakes and confusions and moments when we don't know what's going to happen next. But we're putting ourselves out there a little bit. We're taking a risk. Could be in the kind of risk I was taking. It could be an emotional risk. It could be a professional business type risk. My life's journey has been not fluid. It's been filled with moments of challenge and confusion and change. The teacher in my life has been learned from a problem being solved, learned from a moment being untangled, learned from how to figure out how to make it over a knot, literally and figuratively.
Getting over a knot. How do we get past a problem? We need to use our imagination to understand the problem, and then we use our creativity to find solutions. And perhaps, if we're lucky, we can innovate. This is the lesson that Scott went on to use during his career as the executive director at the Lincoln Center Institute in New York. Scott believes that we can all do things that develop our imagination and creativity. And if we do so, then it will lead to innovation in business, education, and culture. For more information about Scott, check out the link in the show notes. Okay, folks, this is the last episode of Season 5 of Into the Story. I'm already hard at work recording more stories for Season 6, which will be coming out this summer 2024. In the meantime, if you would like to join our community and hear me go further into the psychology side of each episode, and also speak more personally about the lessons I learned from our storytellers, then you can join our newsletter. Just visit intothestorypodcast.com and click subscribe, and it's totally free. Okay, that is all for today. Until the next season, I hope that you have a good time, or at least a good story to tell.